Where were you living at the time?
At the time, I was living on a farm in County, Nebraska. That's northeast. Our address was Emerson. We went to school out in Wakefield.
Okay, why did you join?
First of all, I would have been drafted, but also they would have drafted two of my brothers as well. My mother was a widow on the farm, and she would have just had to shut down the farm. So one of my brothers and I agreed to enlist to allow another one to stay home, help on the farm.
Okay, why did you pick the service branch you joined?
Well, that's interesting. I was the first one in my family. I had 4 older siblings, 3 brothers and a sister. I was the first one to get to go to high school. But as a high school graduate, I had no college. The only officer candidate school available would be through the training as a pilot. So I made a choice between the Army Air Corps and the Navy Air Arm. It was a little bit strange. Sioux City, Iowa, to enlist. When I went into the recruiting office for the Army, there was no one there. And so I went, these rather trivial things have a profound effect on your life. And so I went down the hall. It was in the post office building in Sioux City. Went down the hall to the Navy and ended up enlisting then in the Navy. It was called a V5 program. It was Aviation Cadet program for flight training.
Okay, what were the first days like in the service?
Repeat, please.
What were the first days like in the service?
Well, first of all, this was in 1942, and the training facilities of the Navy for pilot training were clogged up, so I was home for quite a while after I was sworn in, and I didn't go on active duty until I think January 1943. And then it was still not that military. I first went to North Platte, Nebraska. Wasn't even a military base, and I took flight training from a civilian at that time. And that's where I first soloed, just flying the light planes. But then I went to Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa, for 3 months again. And that was just really an academic program, and again, it wasn't a military base. We had military officers in charge, but supposedly we completed a year of college training, college education in 3 months. And from there I went to what's called pre-flight in St. Mary's University in California. And that was also a 3-month program. And so really it wasn't until after that I had completed that I was sent to Norman, Oklahoma for what was called primary flight training. And that was the first time I really was on a military base. All of those training activities prior to that were sort of like a boot camp. Although as officer candidates, we were treated somewhat differently than than an enlisted man. Like, for instance, we had so-called mess hall, a dining hall, where we were served at a table, which of course so-called enlisted men didn't have that privilege. But on the other hand, we had very tough physical training and academic training throughout that period. But really it wasn't until, as I say, I got to Norman, Oklahoma, primary flight training, where then that was a Navy base, and we were in a completely military setting. But as you can see, I'd been sworn in for quite a long time before I ever even got to a military base.
Do you remember your instructors?
No, I don't remember the names of any of my instructors, either in academics. We always accompanied our flight training with academic training, and we studied, they called it meteorology, aerology. It was climate, weather, mechanics, aerodynamics, a range of academic subjects. We spent about half our time in class, and we had many different instructors. So that since I'd already soloed at North Platte, Nebraska, I didn't fly with an instructor very much, and as a matter of fact, we had no specific instructor. So it was years later that not years, but I guess a year later, when I was making transition into combat type aircraft, that I had an instructor that I could remember his name.
Okay, how did you get through all the training and everything?
Oh, what?
How did you get through all the training and everything? Was it really hard?
There was a lot of pressure. The Navy had decided they really had too many cadets in training, and so they were deliberately attempting to wash out, fail. In fact, at one time I took a test flight, 3 planes, an instructor and 2 students, and one of us was going to fail. I mean, they simply had decided before we ever left the ground that one of us would fail. And so, yes, and if we failed, it washed out, that was the term that was used. We were sent to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center on Lake Michigan near Chicago as a seaman, enlisted man. We were out of the flight training and out of officer training. So yeah, there was a lot of pressure throughout that aboard the carrier. Then I was sent to this Opelika Naval Air Station for transition to, this is a picture of the combat plane that I flew. And by the way, that at that time, I was, my instructor was Hinson was his name, and it's easy to remember because his name was Ensign Hinson. But he was the sole survivor of a torpedo squadron which was shot down in the Pacific Ocean. He was shot down too, but he was the only one that survived. He was picked out of the water. Now, instructor, of course, there was only room for 1 pilot, so it wasn't an instructor that flew with me. We did have 2 crewmen in that plane. The one that manned a turret, machine gun turret, and then the other a radioman that was down below here. But that's the plane that I flew on active duty during the war.
Okay, what was your job or assignment?
What was that?
What was your job or assignment in the war?
Well, I was a pilot, and I was shipped to Point, Rhode Island, and joined a squadron there. And we were just ready to squadron, and then on out to Pearl Harbor and Hawaii. Our squadron went out there as a passenger on a carrier, and we were then assigned to a carrier. Our squadron went aboard a carrier then, and from then on we were primarily anti-sub. This was called an escort carrier. It wasn't the big carriers that really accompanied the battleships and cruisers. Basically, our job was to escort ships, non-combat ships, transport ships, to keep the submarines away from them. That went on. We went down into the South Pacific, Guam. Later, came back to San Francisco and went up to the Aleutian Islands, ADAC. And then we went, by that time it was 1945, and the war was approaching an end, but the Japanese had not surrendered yet, so there was plans made to actually invade the main Japanese islands. And my duty at that time, our carrier came off the coast of Japan, and I was strip mapping, this is photo mapping, of the beaches where our troops would land if we were going to invade the island. Now, people my age, of course, and many others remember that at that time the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I was off the coast of Japan at that time, and Japan then surrendered, so it became unnecessary for us to invade.
Okay, did you see a lot of combat?
Pardon?
Did you see a lot of combat?
No, partly because we were flying anti-sub patrol out in the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
And in fact, this one time I went 6 weeks without ever seeing land.
Were there many casualties in your unit?
Not with our operation. I was down in Guam, and we did it one time. We were flying over the islands that were being invaded by our troops, both Marines and Army, and there were a lot of casualties on the ground, but we did not. In fact, our squadron, we never lost a plane.
Tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences. Tell me about some of your most memorable experiences.
Well, one I remember often, submarines are not easy to identify. And we had our own submarines, as well as the Japanese submarines were in the area. We had what were called sub-sanctuaries, and we were not to attack a submarine in one of those sanctuaries. This is just areas in the ocean that had been designated as a safe place for our subs to be, but there wasn't anything, of course, to keep the Japanese from going in there too, but they didn't, supposedly they didn't know where the sanctuaries were, but But in any case, one time when I was flying anti-sub at night, I detected a vessel with my radar. Our planes were equipped with radar. And this was at night. And I won't describe the tactics, but basically we dropped flares that were on parachutes that fall very slowly, and they light up the whole ocean. And while those flares were delayed to go off, when they went off, we were to be under them heading toward our target. The flares would go off above and behind us, and they would light up the whole area like daylight. And there was a submarine there, and I headed right for it. And there wasn't much of it. They had what they call crash dive. They were going under, and I had both rockets and depth charges to attack it. But as I approached it, I thought it looks like one of ours. I was just ready to release ordnance, and rockets and then depth charges, and I held fire and flew over the top of it, and I turned around because I figured I could still get it with depth charges as it was going down. And it was one of ours, but I came very close in a hairbreadth of sinking one of our submarines. And that has never left my mind, because I was within seconds of releasing the ordnance. I've never forgotten that, and I never will.
Were you ever a prisoner of war?
No, I was.
Okay, were you awarded any medals or citations?
Simply the theater, the Pacific Theater Medal and good conduct. No specific citation.
Okay, how did you, or did you even stay in touch with your family? Did you stay in touch with your family during the war? Did you stay in touch with your family?
The memory about?
How did you stay in touch with your family?
I'm still having trouble understanding.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Oh, I was unmarried. As a matter of fact, as an aviation cadet in the Navy, you were not permitted to be married. You had to be single. My family was a widow mother and a bunch of siblings, one of whom was in the Marine Corps in the South Pacific the same time I was down there. During the war, you had very little contact with the family.
Did you have plenty of supplies?
Actually, we ran short of supplies. There was the decision was made by the higher defense officials that the war in Europe would be pursued as the primary goal, with the intention that once Germany had surrendered, or and their allies, once we had gained victory in Europe, then the emphasis would shift to the Pacific. But for quite a period of time, in 1944 and early 45, we were short of supply. There were times when we didn't have enough gasoline and other things, so it was a problem.
What was the food like?
What was what?
The food like?
The what?
The food like? Was it bad or?
No, you know, I don't, I don't feel like any hero. There's no question but what flying off an aircraft carrier was dangerous. We flew out in all kinds of weather, sometimes catapulted off into a fog bank. But on the other hand, when we came back to the ship and landed, you know, we had a clean bed and good food and everything, and so when we looked down on those people fighting, assaulting the islands and whatnot, the conditions under which they lived and thought looked awfully bad. It was awfully bad compared to our situation. You know, primarily there was danger in what we were doing, but not physical suffering, although we flew 4 hours, had a sub-patrol regularly, and up near Japan at the end of the war, when I did some flights taking photos, including on the northwest coast of Hokkaido. It's a long time to sit in one spot strapped in. You can get very, very tired. But you see, we never had to put up with the mud and the filth and the insects and so on that our ground troops had to put up with. So in that sense, we didn't suffer, no.
And was there something special you did for good luck?
The what?
Was there something special you did for good luck?
No, I'm not a superstitious person. One thing that I guess fortunately young people have, we say that we think we're immortal. If you didn't, basically you couldn't function. In other words, you could be frightened, but it couldn't immobilize you. You still had to do your job. And when you sat on a catapult ready to be launched in a fog bank, it was scary. But on the other hand, it also required all the skill one had as a pilot and so on. You simply couldn't let fear control you. You still had to function. So, yeah, there were times when it was scary, but you just didn't think about it. You had too much to do and too much responsibility to worry about whether or not you were going to be killed.
How did people entertain themselves during the war? How did people entertain themselves?
Oh, on board the carrier, we had it better than many did. We had movies. We also the hangar deck on a carrier to this day. They're a lot different than what we were on, but still, that deck is immediately below the flight deck, and it's enclosed. And so we could, when we were not, under an area where we might be attacked or anything, and when we were just, a lot of times, just flat boarding, The Pacific Ocean is awful big. We played volleyball, like used to have the officers of the squadron would play the officers that operated the ship's company officers, and that was, and other things, just playing cards and so on.
Do you recall any humorous, unusual events? Do you recall any humorous or unusual events?
I'm still in it.
Do you recall any humorous or unusual events?
I'm not sure I guess I'm not still understanding this.
Do you recall any humorous or unusual events?
Oh, humorous or unusual events?
Humorous.
I can't remember anything particularly humorous during the war. It was pretty serious stuff, and we were. There was a lot of tension. Now, I became a flight instructor at Pensacola Naval Air Station after the war ended, and so I was a flight instructor there for a couple of years. And I didn't get out till the war ended in 1945. I didn't get out till 1947. But no, I really don't remember anything that humorous.
Were there any pranks that you or others would pull?
Oh, yes, but I can't remember anything particularly noteworthy. Sure, you couldn't have a bunch of young guys together at that time when there wasn't a certain amount of teasing and so on going on. But I don't remember anything specifically or particularly noteworthy about that.
Do you have any photos of the war?
No, are you asking my reaction to the war per se?
Like, do you have any photographs of the war?
Any what?
Do you have any photographs of the war, like pictures?
After the war, first of all, as I said, I was a flight instructor in Pensacola, and then I stayed in. I was in the organized reserve, and I continued to fly on 1 weekend a month as a reservist, and I had a total of 24 years of what's called satisfactory service. So I am retired. I was never really mustered out. I am retired as a lieutenant commander in the Navy Reserve.
What did you think of the officers and fellow soldiers?
They were, I think, particularly the Navy pilots, including the cadet program, there was a very strict selection process. And I really believe and still believe that these were exceedingly superior, capable young people. We had the cadets that I was in training with, and for the most part, our instructors were I think, very high quality people. You think back with some horror, really, about war and all the killing and the damage and so on. You know, there's nothing really romantic about war. We try to make it that, but and so I've sometimes said that with some embarrassment that in some ways I enjoyed my military service because it was we had good equipment, we had good people, we knew what our mission was, and it was satisfying to be in an organization as effective as that one. The Navy Air Corps or Naval Air Service was, I think, an exceptionally high quality service, and so consequently, I never felt I suffered what a lot of others did in other branches of the service or elsewhere. So yeah, yes, I think it was overall very high quality. Now, I don't have any intention of recounting any of the events where, or people that I found reprehensible, that, you know, because I don't think that's useful, and it was such a small fraction. The overall experience was very good, and the people I associated with, my fellow officers, pilots, and so on, and the ship's companies also. I was actually on 3 different ships. I think we're all really superior people, really, overall.
Okay, did you keep a personal diary?
No, I did not.
Okay, do you recall the day your service ended?
Well, as I say, mine was a little different. A lot of the people, most of the people, you know, are on active duty. They were looking forward to the day they were going to be mustered out, and that was a big deal. In my case, I really just went back down to Naval Air Station at Pensacola, where I'd gotten my flight training, and became a flight instructor. And there was no war going on anymore, but you know, my duty was not that different. And then after I became a civilian, I continued to participate in the Navy Reserve and fly regularly, and so I had, as I say, I had what's called 24 years of military service. So I never was really mustered out. I just went on and retired to this. It wasn't very dramatic.
Was your education supported by the GI Bill?
Yes, that after I got out, I did go into business with my brother-in-law in an auto repair business for a year, and then decided that wasn't going to be satisfactory, and I got to thinking of that 48 months of GI Bill that I was entitled to, and decided by that time I did have a wife and child. I decided that I would be better served going to school. So I went in at the University of Nebraska, and with the 48 months of GI Bill, I completed a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and then I went to Iowa State University and completed my coursework for a PhD before my GI Bill ran out. So I'm tremendously grateful for that. It was, I think, a program that I suppose we deserved it, because we had our lives interrupted for a number of years at a very critical time. But I think it was very good for the country, too.
Did you make any close friendships while on the service?
Yes, although I didn't have a lot of them. Unfortunately, one of my friends was killed in a plane crash, and I was flying with him at the time in a different plane. The two of us were flying together, and we were in California before we'd gone out on a carrier, and he was my closest friend, and I accompanied his body back to Birmingham, Alabama, where he was buried. So that was my closest friend, and I never, after that, I didn't really have a really close friend in squadron. After I was down in Pensacola, as a flight instructor, and we did some plane ferrying too. I had a very good friend there from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Fred Tillman was his name. And I still in contact with him. He lives in Florida, near where three of my children live. And so he was a good friend, yeah.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
What about that?
Did your experience influence your thinking about war?
Well, one of the things that I try to disabuse anyone that I meet up with, that there's nothing romantic about war. It's nasty. It kills people and it destroys property, and it ought to be the last resort in settling any kind of dispute, international dispute. It shouldn't be the first by any means. So there's very little good to be said about war. I don't apologize for having enlisted in the Second World War. We know what, I guess even you know, although it's a long time ago, in history now, to you it doesn't seem so long to me, but Hitler was a monster. And at that time I thought, and I still think, that he needed to be stopped, and the Japanese, Hirohito and so on, the leader of that, were also predatory leaders, and with a very powerful military, much more powerful than we had at the start of the war. And so, you know, I don't dispute that sometimes military conflict is necessary, but by my value system, it ought to be avoided until there simply is no other alternative. So,
Did you join a veterans organization?
do I what?
Did you join a veterans organization?
Do I what?
Did you join a veterans organization?
I'm still not understanding.
Did you ever join a veterans organization?
Oh, I've not, yes, I was a member of the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars, both, but I was never particularly active in those organizations.
Do you attend any reunions?
What?
Do you attend any reunions?
No, there's never been a reunion of the squadron I was in the Pacific, nor of the ships that I served on. So, no, I have not attended any reunion.
Okay, how did your service experiences affect your life?
Well, they've had a profound influence, and I have to admit that for the large part it was positive, because I had no college before I went into the military, and I doubt that I would have gone to college without the GI Bill. So the experience, I didn't pursue being a pilot, you know, as a civilian. Flew very little other than the military planes. But so the GI Bill, which was a direct consequence of my military service, had a profound effect on my life, and I acquired a PhD with that, and my career as a professor, I could really go back directly. That would never have happened had I not served in the military.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
I think I've given a pretty complete picture. You know, I sometimes I'm almost a little embarrassed when people more or less treat I treat it as a hero because I don't really feel like, I don't feel heroic. I thought it was necessary to go into the service at that time. I think I served honorably and well, but as I indicated, most of my military service was not unpleasant, and I have a brother-in-law who was a prisoner of war. I have another brother-in-law who was wounded twice. My wife's brother was killed. And so I am close to people who had a lot worse experience than I did. And I feel that they're the ones that should be honored. I did what I was ordered to do. I think I served my country honorably. I'm not at all embarrassed or shamed by anything I did, but I just don't feel that heroic because so many other people suffered so badly in the service and in the military, and it's to them that the big debt is owed.
Thank you. I have a quick question for you, kind of a, she had asked you about the way you view war now. Did that change from the way you viewed basically your entrance into the service and after? I mean,
I think over time, but although I was never really heavily involved in direct combat, I did see the destruction. I flew over Japan after those cities were flattened. And I realized that there were perfectly innocent people by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, who had died or suffered terribly from that. And so before I got out of the service, I had developed, I think, a real aversion to war, and nothing has happened since that makes me think war is any better. But I just think war, I'm reminded right now in the last year or two in the higher administration, the most dovish people, the people least inclined to go to war, are high-ranking military, including Secretary Powell. It's the civilian, it's people who've never been shot at and never seen them that seem to think war is a suitable response to conflict or difference of opinion. I don't think most people who really experienced war see anything romantic or beneficial about it. That's my impression, and that's certainly the way I react.
Well, thank you.
Let's see. That was shortly after I guess that was before I graduated. I was still an aviation cadet there and there. This is our dress blue uniform, and that's dress white. Here's after I got my wings, and this is the wings, as they're called. Which, in service, I don't know whether there's much else in here that. Here by this time, you see I had been promoted. That extra stripe, half stripe there is called Lieutenant Junior grade. I don't know whether there's anything else here that's of particular interest. These two young men. I had a crew of two. I doubt if you can really see them. A crew of two in my torpedo bomber. One time I asked them, I said, now, if we lose an engine, you have a parachute, you can bail out. But if I have control of the plane, I won't be bailing out. I'll be landing it in the water. Now, do you want to bail out or do you want to go with me? I said, I've been landing plane a long time and I haven't done any parachuting, so that's what they said. We'll stay with you. I don't think there are probably any other pictures in here that would show up. Many of these are guys that I was in the squadron with. This is a bunch of us. We were on the flight deck of the aircraft carrier when we went out under the Golden Gate Bridge. And these are the kind of ships that escorted us. They were destroyers and destroyer escorts. There again, was taken on a flight deck, looking out over toward Japan at the end of the war. That's we were within easy sight of the Japanese coast when the war ended. This is that same plane with the wings folded. See, when you came aboard the carrier, you folded the wings so that it didn't take so much room for storage. Here's a picture of our squadron, and here's a picture of just pilots in our squadron. These are both taken aboard ship on the deck of the carrier. I think that's about all. But this was a good plane, very stable. It was a big plane to bring aboard a small escort carrier, but I had collateral duty as maintenance officer in the squadron because I knew quite a bit about mechanics. But these planes and our fighter planes were very dependable. We had very little mechanical problems with our aircraft.